Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Ready Steady podcast. I am, as usual, joined by Barry.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon.
And of course, I'm Mike. It always feels a little odd to introduce myself, actually, Barry, but I should do it.
Would you like me to introduce you? And over here on my left or right, depending on what way you're looking at him, it's Mike Dennis!
From the YouTube channel Ready Steady Play, which may well be what you're watching. This is, of course, the 18th podcast we've recorded for the show, and in this podcast, we'll be talking about board games.
Do we ever talk about anything else?
I think our entire relationship is founded around board games.
Correct. Long may it continue.
But we've got some news, and then we've got the games we've been playing, and then we'll wrap up. We'll call this an episode. If you are watching this, if you're watching the video version of this, which you can find on YouTube, you can also get on Spotify, and may exist on other platforms I'm unfamiliar with because I don't fully understand the magic of the podcast distribution system. But you might notice a giant stack of games on my left here. Those are the prizes that will go out to the raffle winners from the charity stream that occurred on Friday the 6th and Saturday the 7th. It was a big success, and I just want to say a big thanks again to the publishers that sponsored it. Osprey Games, Czech Games Edition, Naylor Games, Chip Theory Games. We had Spielworks as well as Arcane Wonders. So I'm just really grateful to everybody who came forward and sponsored the charity stream. And of course, more importantly, to everyone who donated to support what is a very worthwhile cause. A pair of causes, actually, Samaritans and Crisis Text Line. So we raised over $2,100. I'm super pleased. It's the biggest sum we've raised thus far. And, you know, if you missed out on the stream, then you missed out some amazing moments, including my game of Talisman with Paul Grogan, my game of Captain's Chair with Mark, and some wonderful insights from the contributors over at Whose Turn Is It Anyway, and Mark from Ninja Geek Gaming as well. So we had some wonderful chats about games and things like that to bring the charity stream all the way around to the 24 hours. It actually ended up going 26 hours in the end.
It's too long. And of course, a huge fix whereby I again didn't win anything. But that's okay. I'm definitely not bitter.
Well, there were some great prizes on offer, so I can understand.
There was some great prizes on offer, yeah.
You're disappointed, but them's the breaks. You know, I can't. It is, of course. We distributed the raffle this year by assigning all the donators a number and pulling cards out of the Mind deck. So impossible to fix unless Mark Dainty, who was pulling the cards, has a
sleight of hand master.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think so. I don't think that's true.
I don't think he's even correlating the numbers on these cards to the numbers on the spreadsheet. So
no, he was not. That was my job.
Yeah,
my only job.
There's always next year.
Hopefully, we'll have more prizes next year. And of course, if you did donate, there'll be a video up from the stream in probably already, actually, when this comes out, showing the prize calls and who's won, and so you can go and check that out just in case you won something and I didn't find you. With that in mind, let's move into board game news and what's been going on. Do you want to start or shall I?
No, I'll go first. So we'll do something that's live as we speak. So as we are recording, 2 days ago, Ares Games announced a War of the Ring, I think they call it a 2-decade edition, which is like a 20th anniversary edition, somewhat different, was coming, and it is in the process of being sold as we speak. So War of the Ring, very popular 2-player head-to-head game based in the Lord of the Rings universe, been out now for 20 years between first edition and second edition. There was previously an anniversary edition that released in, I want to say, 2016, 2017, and that has been going for silly money for a number of years. It was limited to, I think, 2,500 copies, and it came with pre-painted miniatures, a slightly larger board, a number of sort of deluxeification elements to it, but it's not since been reprinted and goes for anything up to £3,500 at this point. So the announcement of this 20th anniversary edition came as a surprise. People have been asking for it, but just announced 2 days ago and then put up on sale. The website is struggling. They've introduced a queue system, but your best bet is to, by the time you see this, they'll all be sold, is the way to look at it. They've again limited it to 2,500 copies of the core game, but you can also buy the deluxeified expansions. That's the Warriors and Kings. There are some small tweaks to this version to make it consistent between all the copies and to not impact the older anniversary editions. And all in all, for the trilogy box set, for the core set, anniversary, and the 2 expansions, would cost you £875 British pounds. Ask me how I know, Mike.
Did you buy it, Barry?
I might have.
Oh.
So I do enjoy War of the Ring. I've definitely not played it enough to justify dropping this sort of money on it. And I probably won't see it until 2026. But that gives me some time to get some cool 3D printed stuff off Etsy as well. And actually, I'll probably get a couple of games in because other people I know have the base set, but none of us have the expansions. So I'll be keen to.
Do you need 3D printed stuff off Etsy if you've just dropped close to £900 on this?
Well, surprisingly, yes, right? So whilst the cost seems quite excessive, like even the King's expansion, which the base version you can buy now for 40 quid, 45 quid, last month sold 3 copies at about £1,000 on its own for the anniversary painted edition. So it's comparatively cheap, if not actually cheap, but the board is still a board, and if you want sort of 3D mountains and strongholds and stuff, you have to go aftermarket for the additional parts. Entirely unnecessary for the game, I may add.
I think that, as a hobby, we do love these sort of productions, the tactile nature, the nice product element of the hobby is certainly something that's the appeal cannot be, underestimated or under appreciated, I think, and we could talk about this a bit later when we talk about Wondrous Creatures, but I think, at the end of the day, you will know out there if this is something for you. Do you play enough War of the Ring to warrant this set, or not to warrant necessarily, but to sort of justify, I suppose, investing this much money into a singular game? And I think to an extent as well, if you do feel like this is a worthwhile investment for you, then I think that's great. I think it's really cool to be so invested in a single or in a single game that you want to get such a beautiful edition. And I think it's really nice that they're offering it too, to an extent. I think when I think about all the Kickstarters in my collection that have an incredibly broad amount of product that I never really get to play, either because it's not well developed enough, it doesn't improve the game, it's unnecessary, it's just, Kickstarter bait. I'd much rather the money and the time had been spent creating a more beautiful and defined and refined final product than all this extra bloat. So, this is obviously something that's been put together over the course of 20 years. And I can't speak to the expansions because I haven't played them. I've only played the base game. But I know that it's a reasonably well-refined product. And certainly this edition is going to be really, really great for people who are into it.
Yep. But that is, as I said, live as it's happening. Of course, by the time you see this, you won't be able to buy it.
They'll all be gone. So, hey folks, Editor Mike jumping in here. This is a super quick pickup after the fact. This is a couple days before the podcast comes out. I'm just editing it, and there are still copies of War of the Ring left. So we thought they'd all sell out. They actually went down to about 500 copies left, but it looks like some administration happened since the initial buzz where 1,900 copies apparently sold. They're back up to about 600 copies of the full trilogy set. So if you did want a copy, there are some still available.
But if you do want to keep up with the latest releases, then Gamefound have made that now slightly easier. They have released an app, which is available on Google Play and Apple stores. Doesn't do anything in particular, but it will let you get your notifications and everything straight to your phone. You can keep up to date with all the games that you've backed on Gamefound or pre-ordered on Gamefound, and just something that was a little bit overdue, although the website itself works fine. But if you are a frequent crowdfunder, this app may be of interest to you.
Yep. Well, I think it's probably a good thing that they've put an app out and made that. I mean, to be fair, I've never had any issues with the website, but you know what? If they want to make an app, more power to them. Is there anything special about the app we should be aware of?
Nah, nothing really. Downloaded it. I've not even logged in properly, but I've had a little look. It is just the website in an app form.
Well, there we go. But now, did you see that Gamefound had done all the AI-generated avatars?
No.
So I don't know if they had the capacity for an avatar before, or this just wasn't a thing that they'd done, but they implemented a portrait system or updated the existing portrait system so that everyone had their own portrait/avatar. And as a part of that, they AI generated a picture for everyone that didn't have one already set, I guess, because I didn't have an avatar on Gamefound, and then suddenly I did. And I guess I would have changed it. But everyone's got these sort of like, they look like hand-drawn, cutesy sort of cartoony type things. I had what looks like sort of a cat person or a bear person. It's sort of like childlike imagery, but it's got ears and it's got big cartoony eyes and a cute sort of, well, you can't really see the nose because, well, the top half is very cute. The bottom half looks almost exactly like Hannibal Lecter's mask from Silence of the Lambs. So I look like a furry wearing Hannibal Lecter's mask.
That's exactly the avatar he would have chosen, I've no doubt. But
I was like, yep, I guess I'm keeping this then. But yeah, so I don't know. It was an interesting system. Certainly a very interesting take on decision to implement that. But now when you go to the comments on Gamefound, you can see everyone's AI-generated avatars chit-chatting there in the comments section.
I've logged in. I have no idea what I am. I've certainly got I've got like pauldrons with spikes coming off them. I could be turning my head to the side in like a helmet. Entirely unclear.
Well, there you go. So thanks for that, Gamefound. We appreciate that you took the time to make sure we all had avatars.
Waste of time, but sure. Speaking of waste of times, though, a sneak announcement this week for an official copy of Gwent. So if you don't know what Gwent is, it is the mini game from the Witcher 3 video game. It is a card game where players take turns playing cards into one of three lanes. There's weather effects, there's on-play effects, and the aim of the game is to have the most power on your side, which is just the number, to win the game. Now this was subsequently turned into a digital card game by CD Projekt Red, the developers of Witcher 3, which grew arms and legs from the version that was in the Witcher 3 video game proper to become its own game. It then went through a massive redesign about halfway into its lifespan, and has now since been abandoned and is left to sort of community updates only on the video game version. The original Gwent game, however, in comparison to where the digital card game went, is pretty bad. However, there's a lot of people that have a lot of fondness for the game, and this is being published by a new Canadian publisher, No Loading, where it will come with all the cards that came in the Witcher 3 video game for you to play at home. There have been a number of unofficial versions that you maybe have seen on Etsy. However, this is the first time it's been officially released in full.
And they're working with CD Projekt Red, that's right.
Yeah. It just seems like it's 10 years too late to be super relevant. Like it's, I enjoyed Gwent on the Witcher 3 game. I was heavily invested into Gwent during the beta, and then after the Homecoming transition, eventually kind of phased out of playing the game. But I have zero interest in going back to the basic game. It is not actually good.
Well, I never played The Witcher 3, so I'm totally unfamiliar with Gwent.
The video game, pre-Homecoming, Gwent on the digital video game was great. I played it a lot.
Oh, there you go. So, and this is going to mimic that?
No. This is
okay.
Pure Witcher 3 minigame nonsense. It's not designed as a competitive game. It's designed for you to beat the computer. So, still, a lot of people have fondness for it, and I'm sure people will buy it when it's released. A couple of last bits of news. One expansion for a game that I still have and still want to play a little more, but I'm cooled on a little. It's the Mandalorian Adventures. This is the Clan of 2 expansion. Now I'm a sucker. I'll have any more Baby Yoders that I can get. So I may consider getting this to see what the variety does. I've not yet played all the possible missions from the base game. And so I've not really seen all the enemies or all the variations on the missions, but I'm hoping there are a number of new maps and things to do in this expansion, as the base game is a little basic, even at the sort of higher difficulty levels. And I will maintain that it is not a game for 4 players, it is a game for 2 players, or potentially solo. But this is coming out early next year, I think. And finally, one reprint from a game I know you have on your shelf, and I always wanted to play it. That is Dogs of War, the Paolo Mori game that I believe has things in common with Blitzkrieg and Tug of War systems. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess imagine, so Dogs of War is, I guess, imagine like sort of Blitzkrieg ramped up massively. It's no longer a head-to-head, but it is a series of tug of wars. And what you've got sort of laid out in front of you are these battlefields, and each picture the battlefields as just grids, where the grids are the amassed resources on either side. So you're going to be putting your mercenary forces, and you're going to be putting your forces out on either side of this battlefield. And facing across from each other are in fact noble houses who are hiring you to carry out this warfare on their behalf. And so by distributing your forces, you'll be earning some money in compensation as well. And it's what is the sort of unique selling point of this game and the way it functions at higher player counts, is that all the scoring is secret. So you're trying to enable the noble house you want to win to come out top noble house, and nobody knows what everyone else is supporting, and you've got sort of a second and a third interest as well. And so you're sort of trying to support the ones that you like over the course of many battles. And there's like, I think five sort of sets of battles, and each set of battles is actually 3, and the houses rotate, so each one takes turns. So each house will fight each other house over the course of the game. And so, when two of the houses you're interested in are fighting against each other, maybe you want to be less involved in that battle unless it looks like it's going to swing horribly one way that, towards the house that you're less interested in. But there's a sort of a chart that's tracking the success and failures of the house, and that'll be based on how far in each person went on either side. Or not each person, but collectively, the group at the table went in on either side. And so it's definitely a game of sort of managing your available resources and things like that and deciding when and where to commit it. But it's very opaque. And so I think and there's not a lot of it's not a deduction game. You're not going to be able to work out who's supporting which house and why. You might think someone might be very obviously supporting the same house over and over again. And that's sort of the part of the game, right? Is don't make it too obvious, I suppose. But then if you try to hold back too much, then maybe you won't succeed in the end. So you've got to be maybe a bit obvious. And it's about choosing those moments and things like that. But, I've always enjoyed it. I think it's fun. It's pretty quick to play. It's been a long time since I've played it. It's a pretty old game now, but I've got most of what came with the original Simon Kickstarter, I think. I'm missing one of the mercenary captains, and I never bought the miniatures because they're wholly unnecessary.
In this case, it was not a cool mini.
Well, they were not required. Anyway, sort of ridiculously large, overproduced box, as was the want of Cool Mini or Not at the time, but
and still,
and is still indeed.
Well, I've always wanted to play it, so I'm interested in the reprint. This is published by Play to Z and should be coming sometime next year.
Good stuff. Well, I'm glad it's getting a reprint. I'd be interested to see if they change up the rules, if they do some refinement. I think it probably could benefit from a sort of a more experienced Palamori taking another look at it and refining some things. But as it stands, it's still really good fun. And I mean, it's also, in my opinion, best at sort of 4 and 5. So it's a higher player count, game, in my opinion. I don't think... I've never played it at 2. I actually don't know if it operates at 2. But I don't even think I've played it at 3. We've always sort of got it to the table with sort of 4 and 5 players. So I think that's my only experience. But my impression is that it operates best in that realm because it's quite chaotic anyway.
What do people on Board Game Geek say? Best at 5. Boom.
Oh, there we go.
Right, once again, Mike.
Well, I can only give you my best guesses.
Educated opinion.
But here we go. We've got just 2 more bits of news here. There's a game called Fromage that has just come out. I saw it was top of the hotness, I think, which blows my mind. Fromage has been available to play on BGA for quite a while, actually. I did play it with 2 of the patrons. It is a game that is ostensibly about producing cheese and managing, I suppose, your dairy farm. But really, it's a game about planning actions to optimize scoring victory points. Yeah, it's very Euro. It's quite abstract, I suppose. And there are many routes to score points, but you definitely have to be picky about what you're going to score and how you're going to score them, because there is the unique action selection mechanism in Fromage is this rotating board. So the actions are sort of confined to, imagine quarters of a circle. I can't remember if it's quarters or if it's 5 or 6 spaces, but a circle divided into pie slices. And each pie slice is a sort of different area of point scoring actions. And you've got these little workers, and effectively what you do is you put the workers into, and the workers are pieces of cheese, and they're numbered. And you put them into the top part of the board, and then as it rotates, eventually it will point back at you. The piece of cheese will point back at you, I think. And then you get to collect it. Something like that. I mean, it's got because we played it on BGA, I'm not sure how it works in real life, but each of the numbered cheese pieces you're placing to take an action have a numerical value, which indicates both the strength of the action in the area, so higher number, better action, but also the speed with which the piece will return to you. And so, it's entirely possible if you put out all your high numbers and then place your low number, you could actually have a segment rotate around to you and no workers left to use. I think you'd have to work quite hard to contrive it like that. But effectively, it's like sort of invest in a big action now, wait to get your worker back over the long course. Or maybe the pieces themselves aren't defined, don't have numerical values. They also have different cheese types. So the workers are also cheddar, soft, and blue cheese. And based on which worker you put out, you'll have access to different parts of the actions. And the action areas themselves are things like investing in aging cheese. You've got investing in sort of different regional cheeses, and these are all just sort of different mini Euro games. So investing in the regional cheeses, for example, is actually just an area majority game on a map, where you're controlling sort of different interests on either side of territories. And at the end of the game, whoever's controlling the most interests surrounding a single territory will score points for that one. And there's maybe a second place at higher counts. But, you're effectively, it's like this sort of programming, planning, worker placement, invest in the little mini games game. And I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting. I thought what it was doing was different. It's exactly the kind of system that I find quite easy to get on top of. For whatever reason, this sort of thing comes quite naturally to me. It's very much the opposite of Beyond the Horizon / Beyond the Sun, which we'll talk about later, a system that continues to confound my brain. But so I'm probably the wrong person to ask, well, is this a great Euro? Should I add it to my collection? I think if you're into sort of, I don't want to say point salad, because it's not like one of those comboing Euro games where everything's spitting points at you all the time. But it presents these sort of mini games that you really want to focus. I say you really want to. I think it's probably best to sort of focus on one and then decide how to put your attentions into the other. There is a bit of cross-pollination where you can combo some point scoring elements, I think. There's also an upgrading of your cheese dairy farm as well that gives you some more capacity to collect. You're collecting jams and cows, I think, and you can sort of combo jams with cheeses on your player board to earn additional points at certain moments and things like that. So it's got a fair amount going on. I'd put it sort of in terms of weight. To me, it felt sort of, I don't know what they've got it down on BGG.
Well, I'll have it open. Give me your best guess.
If I had to take a guess, I'd say 2.85.
So close, 2.78.
2.78. Yeah, okay. That sounds about right. I was going to say the heavier side of middleweight. So I think, isn't Wingspan a 2.6?
I think we looked at this the other day and it was lower than that. I think it was like 2.2 or something, wasn't it?
Wingspan is our barometer for middleweight. I think everyone's played it. That's why it's a useful.
Actually, it's 2.47, so it's almost right slap bang in the middle of the.
Yeah, I was going to say somewhat heavier than Wingspan. It felt to me. I think Wingspan maybe because of all the cards feels a little heavier than it actually is. Whereas Fromage certainly doesn't have all those cards and you're not building combos of things. You're more like looking for sort of actions, and it's definitely action optimization. But I think it really appealed to sort of people that like that sort of Eurogame puzzle. There is an amount. There's not really any player interaction, mostly, except on that area majority board, and you could largely overlook that part of the game if you didn't like that element. And then also on the worker placement spaces at the top of the segments. Anyway, the good thing is the game is completely available on BGA. You might need an account to play. I'm not sure if it's a premium app, but it is available there if you'd like to try it before you get involved.
Nice. I've not played it. I have seen it, and I did see it was near the top of the hotness. I think it looks really nice, which is about all I can say about it. And it's interesting that there's always these new themes for board games. So running a cheese farm.
Yeah, it's a nice theme, yeah. But it's not doing anything that's so interesting that I'm going to add it to my collection. If I had fewer euros, then, this certainly might be one that I'm interested in picking up. It's certainly solid enough to stand up in a collection and fill a niche or a spot, but it's just not the sort of thing that I certainly need to add to a collection that has as many euros as mine does.
Fair enough.
And then last for the news, final spot, I'm just going to very quickly go and note that all of the Joyride is Powerboats threads on BGG have been locked down. The conversation is done. Rebellion Unplugged have written a final statement, which I'm not going to read out here on the show, but effectively they are going to add a acknowledgement of Powerboats along with all of the games that they referenced in their designer notes to the front page of the rulebooks moving forward. I noticed as well that people have been review bombing Joyride on BGG, and I don't really have much opinion on that. I think this whole situation is kind of unfortunate, and it's a shame how this has been handled on pretty much every front. So it's just really a bummer. But, it is, I suppose, what it is. And where possible, I guess we should be making sure we support independent designers with good designs. It's so hard to find these products if you're not paying very close attention to the industry, certainly. And that's not to say that Rebellion Unplugged has done anything necessarily wrong. What they've done is legal, but, I wouldn't want to see a world either where people's designs are just being reprinted with different art or one extra expansion, and then the original designer is simply credited. Having said that, without actually being approached for the rights to their design. Having said that, I do know how much work goes into board game design, and it's an incredible amount. And so much of it is testing and removing things that don't work, and just writing off avenues of exploration and going, well, we tried that and it didn't work. We tried that and it didn't work, and sort of closing down those options to really refine where the game wants to be and what it wants to be. And if someone had done all of that work while designing a concept or a game or a set of mechanisms, that's the kind of person I would absolutely want on my team if I was looking at something similar, and if I didn't have them on my team, I'd at least want their blessing. And, if I didn't have their full collaboration, then I would still want them involved, so I just think, it's sort of kind of a shame for, Joyride that Cornet wasn't involved, because I think it could have been an even better game than it is.
Makes sense enough. I've not played either game, but this does occasionally happen, and it's a tough one. Like, where do you come down on it? I think there's a bit of furor around this, if we ignore some of the hyperbole about how alike the two games are. It's like when they give you the same, when you play a game and you feel like you've played it before, and it's some games have similar mechanisms or the same mechanisms, like worker placement, but does it feel like every other worker placement? If so, it's often not a good game. But when you've got like two good games, one's built upon the foundations of another, sometimes it does feel like it's gone too far. And to quote Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, I know it when I see it. And that's not useful as a quantifiable metric for looking at these things. But I've certainly sat down and played a game just been like, well, that's the same as this game, but you've added one choice at the mid game, something like that. Like it doesn't give me the different feeling. So yeah, it's good that they will acknowledge them. The crunch point for this one was, of course, that they approached them before making Joyride, to my mind, so there was a much greater acknowledgement that they were going to be borrowing systems from the earlier game.
Yeah, well, it also, I mean, it feels like, or it might appear as though, there was a desire there to utilize those systems, and it is unfortunate that was never that agreement was never hammered out. But regardless of sort of the way that played out, I think the reason this one's caught fire, certainly in the community and engaged people, is that, Cornet is a long-time designer who's been designing games for a long, long time, but never received major market success. Their games are very hard to find and difficult to buy outside of Essenspiel. And, to an extent, Rebellion Unplugged is a large established publisher, And to that point, I wrote here, we should talk a bit about Red Rising versus Fantasy Realms. I don't think we're going to do that. We're going to try to keep the schedule a bit tighter this week. But, this was a game that was Red Rising, famously inspired by Fantasy Realms. It's a Stonemaier game based on some books that I haven't read, but I've played both games. And, I think there's sort of like three key points that separate these two instances. But I think one of the most important ones is, I don't mean important for the potentially aggrieved parties or people involved. I think the reason why that particular instance didn't sort of evoke the community, or not invoke, but incite the community as much as this has, is because, Fantasy Realms had A, been out of print for a long time, but B, when it was in print at that time, it's now reprinted. It's now back in print. And maybe in many ways is a response to Red Rising, which didn't do very well commercially. But it was also a WizKids published game, and WizKids is a big publisher. It wasn't exactly a, sort of indie design from a self-publishing auteur. Yep. It was very much a sort of a small card game from a big, well-established publisher. And here coming along was another sort of iteration of it, which effectively just bolted on a bunch more mechanisms and things from another big publisher. And people are just less inclined to, I think, sort of, feel emotionally invested when it's two profitable, publishers who aren't, it at least doesn't feel, two established publishers who don't feel like they're going anywhere,
I definitely have to replay Red Rising. I've played a reasonable amount of Fantasy Realms, but I think I've only played Red Rising once. I didn't immediately get the same feel, like just what I'm saying.
Well, it doesn't have the same feel because Fantasy Realms is like a 10-minute game.
Yeah.
It's so fast and then it's just done. And the only reason it works is because it's like 10 minutes long. Otherwise, because it's mainly just luck, It's sort of, it's luck and it's a bit of hope that you're going to draw one of the cool cards that scores with the thing you've got.
Yeah.
And that's about it, There's not much to Fantasy Realms. And they even came out with the Curse items expansion, which was a really nice idea, but almost adds too much extra game time to it. So they tried to add one more mechanism. It got too long, and it's just not the same. And so, by taking that and bolting a bunch of additional mechanisms on, which is effectively what Red Rising is, it didn't improve it. It just got worse. Yeah. So, it's...
Well, that's maybe the other thing, the re-implementation was worse than the original, whereas Joyride, with its bells and whistles, improved upon, so...
Yeah, well, and I think that's, that's probably a much more important point than I would like it to be, because, it should be a matter of principle, really. Yeah. It should be a matter of principle, but also the fact that this is probably, nobody is selling their copies of Fantasy Realms now that Red Rising is here, which is another point in that particular case. Anyway, we will we'll put a nail on that one. I think if you want to know more, you can go and check out the 30+ page forum thread on BGG in the forums on Joyride if you're so inclined to see the discussion in more detail. But I think, it's a really careful line we have to walk, because as as we can see, design is often reiterated upon and iterated upon. This will probably come up a bit later when I talk about Beyond the Horizon, but that's an important part of the hobby. It's an important part of design, and it's not going anywhere. And you probably don't want to have more stringent legal controls around it. Having said that, this is a hobby driven by passion on very tight margins, and people who just sort of have dreams of putting out games that they want to play out there. So, and that's not true of everyone. Some people do come in here with an idea to make money, and they've got great ways of sort of marketing products in order to leverage the most profit out of our community. That's a bit of a pity. We probably want to support the authors who want to make really good games more than, say, people who just want to leverage profit. Not saying that that's Rebellion Unplugged or anything to do with Joyride. I'm just saying as a matter of principle.
Fair enough. Well, that's the news for the week, I think. You're coming in off a 26-hour board game fest. You must have played a ton of games these last couple of weeks. I, however, have been away and out and about, and have played very, very few. So perhaps of the games that you did play during the stream, what was the most interesting, or the one that you liked the most?
When I do the charity stream, I tend to probably spend about half the time sort of collaborating with people and playing games with people, and half the time doing stuff on my own. So I live streamed a lot of solo bits. I did Keep the Heroes Out solo on the challenging difficulty level. I replayed a episode of Nemesis, Untold Stories, that I've been trying to beat forever. This will have been the third time I've streamed this scenario. And if you want to find out what happened, I'll post that VOD later for people to catch up on. But what I did get to play on stream with Mark Dainty 2-player was Star Trek Captain's Chair. So maybe I'll just kick off by talking about that.
Sounds good.
So this is a forthcoming game from WizKids. Mark's got a preview copy, so he brought it over so we could play it. Mark knows almost nothing about Star Trek. At this point, I'd probably been awake for about 22 hours. So I spent a lot of the stream trolling my audience, pretending I did not know anything about Star Trek either, despite the fact I am, in fact, a huge fan. This is a 1 to 2 player game, which I did not realize until I pulled the player count off of BGG. I thought it was up to 3 or 4. So I was surprised to discover it's 1 to 2 player. Now, this is because it is, in fact, very much the DNA of Imperium, Imperium Classics and Imperium Legends and Imperium Horizons, 3 box sets of deck building games where you build up civilizations and compete with your opponents. What's notable about those games is I think they do go up to 4 player. So this is designed by all of these games, that is to say the 3 Imperium sets and Captain's Chair as well, are all designed by David Turksey and Nigel Buckle. And Imperium's published by Osprey, but Captain's Chair is published by WizKids. And Captain's Chair has a weight rating of 3.56 out of 5, which is quite heavy, I think. Although I would not be surprised if it was lighter than the Imperium games, although I'm not sure because I didn't check those. It also says here it's 60 minutes to 2 hours, which is a big lie. Yeah, it's just a straight lie. It is. I mean, maybe if you're playing solo, speed run any percent. But it is a deck building game, and I won't go into too much detail because it's way too heavy. If you've played Imperium, you've already got a pretty good idea about how the game plays. They've streamlined a bunch of stuff in Imperium, taken bits out. This is probably aided by the fact that they've limited it to 2 players, which really is what it should be. I don't know anyone who's, I didn't really get along with Imperium. I liked it well enough. I admired the design more than I enjoyed playing the game. It was just a really clever design. And when I was doing the puzzle, I actually had a really good time. it's a deck builder. You're sort of trying to cycle your deck and upgrade your deck and get cards out and buy cards from this revolving marketplace to put in. All sounds very familiar, but the timing on the cards and the intricacies of the interworkings of the cards are very well done. And, very often you'll finish a turn and go, oh, if I'd played this first and then done that and then done this, it would have been more optimal. Gosh, it's a game of sort of endless optimization possibilities. And you can always see a way you could have worked things a bit more carefully. So I really liked Imperium in theory, but in practice, it didn't really work. Just even at 2 players, it had way too much downtime, and it was just a bit too sort of futzy. There was a lot of sort of care you had to take to make sure you didn't do anything wrong and things like that. So it didn't really work for me. And so Captain's Chair streamlines a lot of that and has made it more focused. And now it's a 2-player game. It still has sort of the downtime problem. It really feels like the designers have prioritized creating this sort of really compelling, intricate, interesting puzzle, and they haven't really put any thought into the player. I don't want. Okay, that sounds too harsh, because what they've added actually is player interaction. So it's got some cards that you will acquire through area majority. So you can start investing your ships and away teams into these cards in order to claim them. And other people can make it harder for you by investing their ships and away teams into the same card. And then you've got a lot of cards that allow your ships and or away teams to kill other people's presence, ships and or away teams on that card. So there's a literal battlegrounds where players are competing. You can ignore this part of the game entirely. I mean, you shouldn't ignore the 3 planets that are available or locations that are available, but you could go for one you don't think someone else wants. On the other hand, that means they might always poach the stuff that's optimal for you, so that'll come at a cost, right? But they've streamlined a lot of the sort of the game elements, so it moves faster and it's punchier, and you get back to your turns quicker. And I think, this is also a case of theme going a long way. Like, for me, Star Trek, I love Star Trek. I'm very happy to play Star Trek. And so that sells it a lot better. There's also the theme of the captains and sort of how they work is very thematic. It's clear that the designers, or at least one of the designers, is a very big fan of Star Trek and understands the captains and the organizations and their motivations and the factions and all that stuff. So that's great. And Imperium was historical. It had art by the Miko, who's an artist who does the Shem Phillips games as well, and they've got a style that's particularly cartoony. So I like their art a lot. I think it's great. I find it very endearing, certainly not off-putting. But I think, if you were the kind of person who's really, really into history and you were going to get the most out of Imperium because you were sort of very historically inclined, I'm not sure if that kind of art would be your first choice. I'm just speculating here. I don't know for sure, but it's certainly, if you were attracted to Imperium by the historical context, I would have thought a sort of a more traditional art style might have brought that or appealed to that kind of person more. But who's to say? Anyway, Captain's Chair. It's going to be sort of probably a 3-hour game. It's definitely not a 1 or 2 hour game. I think it's great at 2. Mork can talk about it solo. I think he's put out a video on his channel, Not Board Gaming, about the solo play element. I imagine it would be very good solo. I think if you were into that sort of puzzle, there are, in the solo mode, you do play against an AI opponent who you have to operate. I don't know how that works, but I do know that, it's not just about beating your previous scores. You're actually trying to beat a opponent who's running the game. But there's a lot of stuff in there from all across Star Trek. It goes all the way up to the new stuff. There's lower decks cards in there, discovery cards in there, all kinds of stuff. What I note as well is that a lot of the sort of the pinnacle characters are missing, right? So like a lot of the a lot of like the original series. Kirk's not in it. Spock's not in it, right? That whole deck has been removed. Obviously, it's an expansion that's coming.
Yeah.
Janeway and Voyager, mostly missing, right? The Borg, mostly missing. The Dominion, not there. So, and there might be little nods to it. Like there's a Borg device that has some icons on it that are going to interwork with other Borg cards when they come out. And so, like, the one thing I would note is that I played like half a practice game with Mark, and then we played the full game on the stream, and we saw like all of the cards in the marketplaces. No, that's not true, actually. We saw a lot of them. Particularly, there's an ally deck that Picard really likes, and a cargo deck that Shran, who is the Andorian that Mark was playing as, really likes. And so we saw a lot of those decks. And so personally, I would have liked to see those decks have more cards in. My knee-jerk reaction is that more cards would make them more interesting, more varied. Certainly, it depends on the combos, what you're hunting for, what you're trying to build. There's a chance that, you start to get to the Arc Nova problem where the big decks are off-putting for people. Now, obviously, Arc Nova hugely successful. But one of the main criticisms was that people can't find the cards they want in order to build the strategies that they want. They kind of have to play to what comes out. And maybe bigger, thicker cards. Decks in this will have that same effect. Doesn't really bother me that much, but I can see it bothering some people if they go and going, I want to try this strategy this time.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, seeing every card has its own advantages. Do you know that this card exists? You know that it's going to come up. Do you wait to execute something because you're going to want to see this card first, risking perhaps your opponent getting it before you, or do you just go with what's there? So I'm not against smaller decks where you can have some degree of certainty that a card will show up, just not when. But I also enjoy variety, so hard to say. And Imperium I did not get on with either, neither solo or multiplayer, be that 2 or 4 players. Way too long at 4 players and too fiddly. Solo, I believe Horizons made some changes to the solo mode, but I've not played it because I got rid of my other cards. But I think Mark said that he liked Captain's Chair more than he liked the Imperium games.
Yeah.
But it still, to me, seems like it would take a little too long for what I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's a dueling game or solo game. But yeah, it's a sort of a sit down, spend your afternoon on it kind of game. It's not a bust it out and have a quick game kind of game. Unless you're super across the rules or like just incredibly familiar with it.
That's fair.
But I think if you like their previous work, certainly Cersei's got a lot of work out there. If you like that stuff, if you're a big fan of Star Trek, I mean, if you're just a fan of Star Trek, look into this because it's a heavy game. It's it's sort of a heavy, mechanical, unintuitive game. But if you like Voidfall, if you like those sorts of puzzle, sort of interlocking mechanisms, sort of puzzling out the strategies, and you like Star Trek, then I think this, and especially if like 2 players your jam, and you're not too worried about a little bit of player interaction. You're not worried about too little player interaction, but also if you like, I mean, you can pick captains that have less, or captains that have less interaction because there's very asymmetrical starting decks, right? And that to an extent that's going to be sort of defining what you're going to do. But if even a little bit of player interaction messing with your puzzle bothers you, then there's going to be stuff that's going to bother you in this as well. Like it's not completely a solo affair unless you play solo. But even then, like, the AI is going to mess with your puzzle, I imagine.
Yeah.
But for what it's worth, I'll probably pick up a copy. I really enjoyed it and I'd happily play it again.
Very good, very nice. And then you said, whilst you're all over Fromage, You suck at Beyond the Horizon.
So Beyond the Horizon, I picked up at Essen Spiel. This is the re-implementation of Beyond the Sun. Interestingly, it's not credited or linked on BGG, which I found surprising, because it very much is Beyond the Sun rehashed. Rehashed sounds pejorative. I don't mean it like that. This is a sort of a re-implementation that is has been refined and changed. So what's interesting to me about this as well is that so the Beyond the Sun is that big space technology tree game, right? The whole idea is that it's a technology tree that players are building as they play the game, and you get invested in the tree as you uncover the technologies. And then it's got a little space board where ships fly around and fight each other. And then you've got your own player board, which has sort of development tracks on it that you're trying to unlock. Have you played Beyond the Sun, Barry?
I have, many times.
Great, good stuff. Have you played... oh God, what's the expansion called?
I've not played the expansion because it's very expensive for what you get in the box, so nobody's bought it.
I have a copy of it. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit as well. But Dawn of... Leaders of the Dawn? Bear with me.
It's Leaders of the New Dawn. Not the old Dawn, the New Dawn.
Leaders of the New Dawn. So, Leaders of the New... So, the reason this came up is because Beyond the Sun is designed by Dennis K. Chan. Leaders of the New Dawn is Dennis K. Chan and Joseph Suma. But only Dennis K. Chan is credited on Beyond the Horizon, which has actually got three new designers credited to it. Adam Hill, Ben Pinchback, and Matt Riddle. And they are... and then also it credits Simone Luciani, the sort of famous Italian designer, as a developer. And so the publisher is Cranio Creations. They are an Italian publisher. They did not publish Beyond the Sun. It was Rio Grande Games. So they're sort of taking this on as a new thing. But it's still a 2 to 4 player game. It says 90 minutes to 2 hours, which is actually surprisingly accurate, I think. Might go up to 2.5, depends on your player count for sure. It says here the weight is 3.35, which is pretty accurate as well, I think. And what you're doing is you're building up a civilization from the ground up, and you're starting off with sort of these development tracks that are filled up, and you've got these little pawns. And there's also the main board, which is a technology tree. I'm going to explain this like you don't know what Beyond the Sun is. A technology tree, and it starts with 4 basic technologies, and then these branch up into 2nd, 3rd, and 4th tiers, where the 2nd and 3rd tiers are sort of increasingly powerful technologies, and then the 4th tier is going to be endgame scoring stuff. And the endgame scoring stuff starts face up. So over the course of the game, you are going to get invested in the basic techs, and then start to get invested in the 2nd and 3rd level techs that you can get to from those basic techs. And probably you're building towards one of the endgame scoring technology cards that you've decided is going to work best for you in your strategy this game. Now, there is alongside this a board, which is a hex board. It starts with 1 main hex tile that's always in play, and then 1 hex tile that is the home region of the players. So 2, 3, or 4 based on your player count. And you're going to put your little, your starting pawns out in there, and you'll have 2 pawns that exist on this board, settlers and fighters. And you can explore the board. So there's a big stack of face down tiles, and your settlers are going to wander around revealing new tiles. And each tile has a village and a fortress on it. And your settlers can settle the village, and then you'll get some bonus actions and in-game scoring. And your soldiers can settle the fortress and just secure endgame scoring. So this is, and so the purpose of the game really, it's to score the most points, and you're going to get those points from sort of, I guess, like 3 main areas. You're going to get them from the technologies that you've uncovered, those endgame scoring things, and then these villages and fortresses, which are actually a huge amount of points. There's also some other, there's also these sort of first come, first served objectives that also serve as the timer for the game. So these are these big objectives, and when you achieve one, you put a cube on it, and you have to achieve it if you can. And then when there's 4 cubes, or depending on player count, a variable number of cubes out there, this triggers game ends and you finish up the rounds and then you're done. The big difference between this and Beyond the Sun, so this is now for people who do know Beyond the Sun, is that civilization board, right? Like pretty much everything else is largely the same. The dice are gone. Now they're these pawns. The dice are better. But for whatever reason, probably because the dice are no longer resources anymore, they decided to get rid of the dice. Maybe it's just because the dice were very expensive. I don't think this is massively cheaper than Beyond the Sun, but it has a huge number of tiles that don't exist in Beyond the Sun. So maybe the savings they made on the custom dice they've now put into tiles. But the big difference is that board that you're exploring, and the real big difference between that and the planets that you are doing is the spatial component. So in Beyond the Sun, you've got that galaxy, and the way you move around, it's fixed. It's just which cards come out into the different positions on the board that changes. Here, the board sprawls ever outwards. There's this sort of exploration that adds tiles to the board, and people can explore out in any direction they want. And then you're moving across the land. And furthermore, in Beyond the Sun, you have to control a planet in order to colonize it. That means you have the most there on the planet in order to take it over. So there's this area majority element. Here, you don't need to have control anymore. So you just need to be able to pay the cost. But it's a little bit more challenging to set up the act of taking control of, say, settling a village or securing a fortress. Because you have to... Settling a village is slightly easier. Securing a fortress, you have to get a token, and then you have to spend it. So you could feasibly do both of those things in a turn, but you would have to have all the soldiers on the location. Like none of the actions that let you move soldiers around also give you the token you need to spend to secure the fortress. So it's more kind of like telegraphing your intentions so people have an opportunity to stop you. Which, it's a sort of a slightly subtler, different flavor of the same thing from Beyond the Sun. But it does feel different. So, it is still got the whole develop the tech tree thing, and that's largely the same. I can't remember if are there like event cards that you get when you first develop a technology before you put one out in Beyond the Sun? Yeah, so they've got those, except now they're historical leaders. Yeah, and there's a system of building buildings on those land tiles as well, so you can actually override a tile completely with this building that does something else. But you can only do that if no one's made a village or fortified the city. Anyway, it is my sort of, after one play, my takeaway is that it is not significantly different to Beyond the Sun. I think if you really, really like Beyond the Sun, you'll probably really, really like this.
Yeah, well, I do like Beyond the Sun. And the one review of such that stuck with me for this one is that this is just better.
Interesting.
Which makes, I've not played it, I want to play it because of this. Just like it streamlines the things that needed to be streamlined, and it makes the decisions more interesting than the space board for the base Beyond the Sun. And I saw this one review, and it was just like, there's no need to have both, and I would always say, Beyond the Horizon's the one to get.
So I would nuance it a little bit. I would say, look, if space is your jam, like if the theme matters to you, then just pick the one with the theme you like. They're not so significantly different that you should sacrifice your love of space conflict or civilization building for the other thing. What I would also highlight is my experience with Beyond the Sun has always been quite good. I enjoy it. I'm not good at it. I generally lose it. I've never played with the asymmetrical boards from the base game. Mm-hmm. Have you?
I want to say yes. That's the unique player powers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I think we always play with those.
Right, and you haven't found them to be problematic?
Well, we're not good enough at the game that I'm sure somebody's gets an advantage from it, but we don't know who that person is.
Yeah, so I have not had that experience either, but a couple of players at my table have had that experience with the asymmetrical powers from the base game of Beyond the Sun. Now, I don't think I've played with those. I have played with or if I have, again, it was with a table where they didn't make enough of a difference for me to even remember it. What I have done is played with the asymmetrical powers from Dawn of the New Dawn of the Leaders of the New Dawn.
Yep.
Leaders of the New Dawn, which were great. I really liked the asymmetrical powers in that, and they also gave you sort of a little bit of a boost into sort of like a prelude from Terraforming Mars, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they were great. But there was, I remember when we were getting out Leaders of the New Dawn, a couple of the async powers that we just thought were like, no, that can't be right. That's way too good. So we just didn't play with those because there were loads of other options.
Yep.
And we sort of, and so, going into this, there are people going, well, we don't play with the asynchronous powers or the async powers from the we don't play with the asymmetrical powers from the original game because they're totally unbalanced. And going into this, it starts you with a government, and each of the governments is different. There's 4 government cards and they're double-sided, so 8 possible options. And they give you asymmetrical powers, and you draft those in reverse player order. So presumably it's to offset first player. Now, unfortunately, I had first player, which is unfortunate because I'm not good at the game. So I can't really capitalize on it very well. But the player in second drafted an ability that felt really, or it didn't feel really strong. I wouldn't have looked at it and gone, oh, that's incredible. But they looked at it and went, this is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And then they proceeded to double everyone's score. And it was a foregone conclusion like 15 minutes into the game. Like, it was pretty savage.
Mm.
And so that just kind of triggered me a bit when people were talking about how those asynchronous powers were not balanced in the original game either. Not my experience, but I'm not sure if I've even played them. But this game of Beyond the Sun was not very exciting, which was a real pity. Sorry, Beyond the Horizon was not very exciting, which was a real pity. I think if I were to play again with a different group, I'd probably take that card out. If I were to play again with the same group, I'd probably want to reshuffle the powers, but keep them the same just to see if, someone else could break the game in the same way. Or if it's just this particular player happened to be very, very good at the game. But I had a power that just felt really, really underwhelming. But having said that, it turned out to not be... I didn't do super well. Like, this player who won scored 90. The rest of us were on 30, 40, and 50.
Mm.
I was on 40, and I didn't play a particularly good game. But I'd also been given a card, because I'm a player that likes to get sort of involved in exciting stuff. And the card I'd been given railroaded me into the fortresses strategy, which are big points, but they're kind of just, it's just not the kind of strategy I like to do.
Yeah.
And the power I had gave me a bonus action every time I secured a fortress. And then I could unlock an endgame scoring condition that would give me points for the number of fortresses I'd secured. And so it just was not something I was really interested in doing. And I was just really railroaded into it.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike Beyond the Sun, these powers are not optional.
Yeah.
So you have to play with them. Now, there are a reasonable variety of them. You could certainly delete one or two without, impacting, and still have some randomization to the setup, I suppose, is what I'm saying. But certainly, it was not a good first experience of the game. And I'd happily play it again, but it just certainly didn't come out in its best light.
Gotcha. I don't know anything about Beyond the Horizon to dispute it. I know Beyond the Sun, player order matters a lot. What players have done before you and what faction you are matters a lot, particularly like turn 2, once the game's not opened up massively, but has changed the state of the board, like being 3rd or 4th on turn 2 as the United Nations of Solar, I think they're blue. Your options are worse than if you were first player Nishida or whatever, but a lot of that comes down to knowing the game more, right? So there may have been an opportunity to deny the player that ran away with it the opportunity to run away with it. I don't know. And the discovery of those strategies is an interesting part of games, I find. Or it could just be that it's broken.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're right to an extent. I don't know if this is the sort of game. And in Beyond the Sun, what you can do is you can stop people from doing certain things, I suppose, by contesting them on planets, right? There's also a sort of ebb and flow to Beyond the Sun where you do some technologies and then you go do some planets and then you go back to doing some technologies, which doesn't feel quite the same in Beyond the Horizon, that sort of ebb and flow. And so, I mean, I would say, go out and see if you can get a game in. If you like Beyond the Sun, you'll probably like this. Hopefully you don't have the same sort of experience we had. I'll be interested to play it again. But certainly our first game of it, it just didn't really manifest as a very... The thing is as well, it is a game that sort of has it is a sort of to an extent, a positive feedback loop game, because as you get further on down the tech tracks, you get access to all the more exciting and efficient actions. And so I don't know it just doesn't feel like as a game, there's like a lot of capacity for sort of stop the leader type antics. There isn't really in Beyond the Sun either, but it didn't happen in Beyond the Sun, in my experience playing it. So maybe I see
the only complaint about government cards on the forums is the one that interacts with cities. Is that the one you had?
Which one is it?
It says the government card which interacts with cities. So how many cities do you claim?
Yeah, that's the one.
Soldiers and fortifies.
Yeah, that's the one I had.
Yeah, there's a thread that one is not good. So maybe it is just a bad card to have.
Well, that's kind of a sort of the next thing, right? That I was going to say is they've added 3 new designers plus a very famous developer, and they're still having this problem. That's a pity because they haven't like sort of radically changed the game, So I wonder what they've been doing.
The difference between design and development, I suppose.
Well, but they've added 3 designers and a developer.
Yeah, you'd hope they're doing some development.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's certainly, if you're, it's a shame, I guess, that you can't take those things out.
Yeah.
Because the only offset for player count is drafting those in reverse order.
Yeah.
But I'd certainly give it another crack anyway. And next time I'll just not take that card.
Fix it.
I'll fix it with an expansion. Yeah, but it'll be too expensive to buy, Barry.
Very possibly. Nice. So it's good to get an alternate opinion, because I was sitting here thinking that Beyond the Horizon was a definite improvement. Seems like there's more nuance, as you've mentioned there.
Well, I can only speak to the evidence that has presented itself after one play.
Well, as I said, I've not played a huge number of games myself these last couple of weeks. In fact, I've only played 2 games, one digitally, one physically. The first game I played is Shipwreck Arcana. Now, I think I've talked about it on the stream and passing at least before when I played it on Board Game Arena, but I went out of my way to purchase this game. So this is designed by Kevin Bishop, and his brother, I believe, Matthew Bishop, is the artist, and self-published under Metamorph Games. It is a cooperative deduction game, and I ordered it directly from the States from Metamorph Games using MyUS, which so Metamorph games only ship to the US, and I got a middleman to send me, a company as a middleman to send it out. When I looked up the price for getting the base game and the expansions, it was about £37 here, and I could get the 2 promos for like an extra £3 shipped direct. I was like, okay, fine. Except when I placed the order, I clearly clicked the wrong button, and it ended up costing me twice the price for practically next day DHL shipping from the States. And I was like, oh no. I'm so very much overpaid for it. So glad to have got some games in. But this is a game where players have 2 tiles, numbered 1 to 7. And on the board in front of the players, there are clue cards. It is a cooperative deduction game, as I mentioned, where you must place one of your tiles against one of the clue cards. So these clue cards are in the form of they look like tarot cards, but they have restrictions as to what tiles you can play there. So one restriction might be, if one of your tiles is 147, play the other one here. So if you put a tile down there, all the other players know that you have a 1, a 4, or a 7, because otherwise you could not legally place your tile on that Arcana card. And then they have to deduce what it is that you do have, and you may be able to eliminate some additional additional numbers based on where I didn't place my tile. So there's 3 other clues out there that I could have used. Why did I use this one? With an extra layer of cards get discarded as more tiles are placed to them. So low value tiles are worth less than high value tiles. So if I placed a high value tile on a card that is going to make it become discarded, that is a way of triggering a game loss if other players cannot guess my tile. So by putting something down there, am I giving information just by the value of the tile I've placed, or do I just only have 2 tiles the same and I have no limited choices? And you basically go around until you've guessed players' tiles 7 times, or you've incorrectly guessed a few times, or otherwise not been able to guess, and the clue cards have faded away. It is, I'd say, quite a well-balanced deduction game for people that like these kind of things, like what I'm saying, for the clues you're giving and the clues you're not giving being equally important or interesting. The different powers on the cards are also useful and part of the game. Sorry, I should say that when a clue card fades away, it gets flipped over and gives players an additional ability, and that could be you get to guess 2 numbers. You can ask a player if it is the same as another tile that's on the board. Other hints that you can use strategically to make a guess about what a tile a player has kept. And so I was in Scotland last week, and I took a few games up, just the Papa U's and the coup, and that's not a Highland coup, that is the deduction game, social deduction game coup. But the only one I ended up playing was Shipwreck Arcana, and I only played it 2 players, but played it 4, 5, 6 times. Had a lot of fun with it, and can highly recommend. If you wanted to test it, the game is also available as a print and play from the Metamorph Games site.
Oh, that's nice. It's always good when people make things available for free so you can try them out.
It'd be a pain in the butt, I think, to to actually print them all off and create tokens, but some people have, and they've made some very nice sets at home.
That's cool. Is it only available then via the publisher from the States?
No, like the only reason I bought it from the publisher was it was going to be about the same price, but with both the promos.
Right.
But just choose the $13, I don't care if it gets here in 8 weeks shipping option, not the $40 send it to me immediately option, which was my error. But I did get it very quickly. So
why don't we talk a little bit about Wondrous Creatures, Barry, because I've played it now.
Finally had a game, yes.
And so Wondrous Creatures is, well, we talked about it before on the podcast in the last episode. Barry played it then. It's a 1 to 4 player. It says here 40 to 80 minute, which is lies. It's a 1 to 4 player game, and it will depend on your player count. I would suggest half an hour per player.
Probably. Yeah, I think, at 4 players, 2 hours seems more likely. And a little over for your first game as well when you got to teach it.
Yeah, and certainly it depends on your players as well. I saw a lot of people in the forum saying this is best at 2 to 3 players. I played it at 4, but everyone was dead quick and the downtime wasn't a problem. Sometimes the game also has very quick turns to resolve, and sometimes it has longer turns to resolve. But more on that in a minute. So the weight is just under 3, which is about right. I guess that's half above where wingspan is, so half a point above where wingspan is. And yeah, that's probably right. I mean, I actually don't think it's maybe that much more complicated, but it's hard for me to guess these things anymore because I'm used to very heavy games. This is designed by EMCW and published by Bad Comet via crowdfunding. And what you're doing, is you've got like this sort of interesting action selection and tableau building setup, right? Like as Barry was describing in the last episode, the cards do sort of, you're auditing cards. There's an open drafting marketplace. You're picking up cards from there, putting them into your hand, and then playing them out in front of you into a tableau. And they've got like sort of 4 different functions, right? Some of them will give you a power that you can use when you want. Some of them will give you a passive thing that enhances other stuff. Some of them will give you endgame scoring. Some of them will give you a power that triggers when you take your recharge turn. And that's the turn you take when you've placed all your workers. You've got 3 of them. They go out onto a central board, which is made up of hexagonal spaces, and the workers cover 2 of them. And then they will gather resources from the hexagons around the 2 that they've stood on. And those, they can either gather, and they'll be surrounded by these biomes, right? 4 biomes in the game that match the 4 resources on your player board. You'll need those resources to play the cards from your hand. So when you play next to the biomes with your worker, you can either gather the resources or instead draft cards from the market which match the biome, because all the creatures live in those biomes. And so you can take a card or the resource, but not both. And so you're sort of there making that decision. There's also this like really unintuitive, weird egg system. We can talk about later. I don't know why it's so bizarre. But one of the really sort of appealing things about the game is the beautiful production. It's got all this lovely art. All the cards have unique art. It's got these big fancy wooden worker pieces, and they're magnetized so that you can attach little riders to them. And so what you've got are 3 workers, one of which will have a rider, and that rider is your captain, and they have a special power. So they give that the beast that they're riding a special power. The whole thing's kind of marketed in the rules as a preservation game, like we're sort of capturing the animals to take them to a nature reserve or something. But it's got sort of deep, sort of like Monster Hunter hunt the animal type vibes, like it really, or Pokemon capture the creature type vibes. So thematically, it's a little bit strange. I had a character whose whole thing was like, befriending and making friends with the animals. But it didn't feel like I was doing that. It just felt like I was collecting them and then turning them into tags in a tableau in front of me. But yeah, so I can totally get what you meant last week when you said this is probably someone's favorite game. I've seen a lot of comparisons to Arc Nova, and when I first heard that, I was like, no, that's silly. And then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, yeah, okay, I can kind of see where that's coming from. I'd forgotten actually that Arc Nova kind of has open drafting. It doesn't really, but it's got an open marketplace that you go to. I guess compared strongly to Everdell, which obviously has sort of open drafting. Although you don't really ever draft the cards in Everdell, it's more like an open hand and you just play directly from the available spaces. You can also take them into your hand in Everdell, but you don't have to. It doesn't feel like Arc Nova.
No.
Which I was surprised by. I thought Arc Nova actually felt heavier than this. Maybe it's just the turn-to-turn weight of Arc Nova's higher.
Well, like Arc Nova is a lot heavier than this, I would say.
Yeah, me too. Okay, great. So the comparisons to Arc Nova, seem a little strange because this just doesn't have any of the sort of geometric park building stuff. And there's some overlap in the sense that there's sort of communal objectives that you're trying to hit, and you're collecting tags, and you're building a tableau of played cards, and they're going to give you all kinds of different stuff like passive abilities and things like that. But there's quite a lot of micro turns in this. Like you've got sort of very limited actions that you can do on a turn and very limited things you can do on a turn. And then once you do it, you just kind of play it out. Anyway, yeah, so I can sort of see where the overlap comes from. It is lighter. There's more micro turns. It's sort of quicker and punchier to play. I'd rather play this at 4 than Arc Nova, I think. Just because
I'd rather play almost anything than Arc Nova at any count, but that's
you don't like Arc Nova. That's fair enough. I quite like Arc Nova at 2. I'll play it at 2. I'm happy to. But I can sort of see people's issues with it. And one of the sort of things I commented on while we were playing Wondrous Creatures was just like that. I said, there's no point in me reading the cards in this marketplace when it's not my turn, because when it's going to be my turn, they'll all be different. Like the market, it's the opposite of June Imperium Classic, right? Where the marketplace would never change. Now the marketplace just shifts so rapidly, so frequently that you'll just see new cards all the time. And this might well have been, this is almost certainly actually a result of the 4-player game that we were playing. But it also didn't really bother me too much, and even though I couldn't really plan ahead at the cards that were there in the market necessarily, occasionally I couldn't. That was a nice little extra, but I didn't really have to, and it was still an enjoyable experience. I think if it wasn't for the exceptional production of the game, there's nothing that it's doing that gets me so excited that I'm like, yep, this is the standout one that I have to recommend. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're into sort of these sorts of tableau building games, if you like quicker games, quicker versions of that, if you like ones where there's maybe a little bit more player interaction, because here we're sort of playing out on a map, albeit I think it looks more interactive than it actually is. It's still kind of just waiting for the spots to open up. If somebody even takes your spots, there's typically quite a few better spots. There's some interesting timing around, like when people are going to do their recharge turn, people can surprise you because there are ways to delay it as well, which is nice. But, it's not doing anything that's so new and innovative that I'm suddenly like, oh yeah, okay, this is what I can pinpoint as the standout feature to recommend this game. But if you like that sort of thing, if you like terraforming Mars, or if you liked the sort of tableau building elements of Mosaic, if you like Everdell, if you like Arc Nova, then yeah, definitely check this out. It's going to be in your wheelhouse,
Yeah, and don't be put off by the cutesy nature. I mean, as you say, the style and art will appeal to a number of players, but it's equally likely to put some, serious gamers off. But the game is a game of
people who are dead inside.
Exactly, because the art is fantastic, and I love the little meeples, both the creatures and being able to put a meeple on a meeple. What a great time!
I said, like setting aside the art, because I think actually the art and the presentation is a huge selling point. Yeah, a huge part of the appeal. Like it's fun, and it's fun to handle. To be fair, I backed it on Kickstarter. I've got all the wooden resources and the metal coin, trophies and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So, that's all enhancing the experience as well. But as a sort of a deluxe package, it's really good. It's really nice. It came with a bunch of alternates. So like you've got the meeples in each color, but then you've got like 3 or 4 different creatures for each color, and they've all got a unique power, which is totally irrelevant and inconsequential to the game.
Yeah, and you got a choice of potentially even drafting those at the start, where you go 3 the same or 3 different. But yeah, the game is a game of put out your workers, collect your resources, use those resources to buy cards or play cards, then work on towards completing shared objectives and personal in-game goals based on your tableau. And like you say, it's a lot like other games, but it is wrapped up in this presentation that works. And whilst I've only played it once, I did feel like there was a lot to explore within the game, to try and find those broken combos and those powerful combos, I should say. And whether you go heavy into working on the trophies, whether you go heavy into just trying to complete a couple of objectives at the top scoring opportunity, there seemed like there was a very solid game underneath it. to enjoy at the same time.
Yeah, it certainly feels like a solid game, and I think it's going to be a good example of this sort of thing for people that are into this sort of thing. As you rightly said last week, this lives or dies by the sort of distinctiveness and variety of the cards, and it certainly feels like it's presented plenty of options and interesting ones at that. You said that you went down a route of recharging or getting recharge powers, and that's certainly something that I tried a bit as well. But I think I also went down a route of sort of stacking up a lot of endgame scoring, which meant I didn't get a lot of exciting turns where I was doing lots of comboing. The player opposite me had a lot of the not the passives, but the powers that you can trigger with energy. And so they had bigger, longer turns that looked a lot more exciting. But in the end, I did win the game. So it's not necessarily just about having sort of turns that appear very exciting. Having said that, I was jealous of what they were doing because it looked more fun.
You maybe win, but who had the better time getting there,
Yeah, well, exactly right. Did they win in the end in a different kind of way?
Time best spent.
But it's nice to see the boards develop distinctively,
Yeah, and as you said about the eggs, yeah, like did you fully get the spending of the eggs versus them being the right way up for completing objectives and all this?
So
we
understood the egg rules correctly and how they functioned. It's just that they're weirdly unintuitive for two reasons. One is that, so during the eggs basically give you extra tags, right? So you're collecting sets of tags to accomplish the objectives. And during the game, you have to, whenever you use an egg to achieve an objective, you flip it over and it hatches and reveals these two cute little eyes staring at you. At the end of the game, if you need to count tags, you can count the eggs no matter what state they're in, which is weird. Well, it's not weird, it's just different to the way it works during the game. But also, like, why? But then during the game, you can also reset the eggs. If you get certain powers, they'll let you flip the eggs back over. So you like shoving it back into the egg? Like, so, yeah, it's hatched. That's done. It's hatched. It can't go back. You can't go back in. I don't know anywhere where eggs go back in, let alone every single creature type on this island can go back in the egg, and then so some players were sort of like trying to figure out how they could sort of restore the eggs so that they could hatch them again at endgame scoring, but they didn't need to.
Yeah,
because they still count at endgame scoring. So it's thematically just a bit weird and mechanically a little inconsistent. So the eggs felt like sort of the most sort of strange part of it. Like they should have been something else, Like I couldn't help but wonder if they were like Pokeballs or something at some point. It really feels like it could have been a Pokemon game.
It could have started life as a Pokemon game and it's, recalling them into the Pokeball.
But anyway, the weird eggs aside, yeah, this is in the wheelhouse of things that you like. Then do check it out. And you'll find, I think it plays faster than most other examples of this genre. I also think that it should be played faster because it's less complex, I think, than, say, a Terraforming Mars or a Arc Nova.
Yeah, it never builds up to become overwhelming where you've got to do a dozen things on your turn,
No, you never feel like the tableau is getting wildly out of control.
Yeah. Nice.
I see you've been playing a small box game with all your favorite players?
I have been playing a game with all my favorite players. The size of the box is a mystery to me, however, because I've been playing it on Board Game Arena. So this game is Resist! This is a solo game, as Mike said, all my favourite players. Published by Salt and Pepper Games and designed by Trevor Benjamin, Roger Tankersley, and David Thompson the First. I can only presume that means there is at least one other David Thompson. Otherwise, it seems unnecessary to have that differentiation.
Yeah.
And it is... I've been meaning to play this for ages. This or Witchcraft, which is the re-implementation, the newest version of it, and I'm glad that I did. I had an eye on it while it was in alpha on Board Game Arena. Never got a chance to play it, but then it came to beta, and I thought, right, let's give this a go. And this is a game set during the occupation,
It's during Franco's fascist regime in Spain.
Certainly taking over Franco's headquarters. All becomes clear now. So the game lets you recruit these resistance members. So to begin the game, you deal yourself two resistance members. One you recruit, one goes back into the village effectively. And you do this 12 times until you have a deck of resistance members. Then the game is played by dealing yourself a hand of 5 resistant members, although there are some spies in your setup deck. Then you play those characters either during the planning phase for the action that's on them, or once you've played out the planning phase, you go on a mission, which is choose a mission card, which has a set number of enemies against it. You reveal those enemies, and then you can play cards for their attack. And in both of these stages, the planning and attack phase, you have 2 options, either to play them hidden, where they're working behind the scenes to do something, or revealed, which generally gets you a better power. But after a revealed character, at the end of the round, the revealed characters are discarded. They've been caught or used up, have to flee, and very hard to get them back.
Impossible. I think they're dead.
No, there are cards that let you pull characters back out of the discard pile.
Are there? Okay.
Yeah, but again, thematically, whether they're supposed to be dead or whether they're supposed to have fled the scene after revealing themselves, up to you. I've not actually read the rulebook, so I don't know what the story is. But basically, that's going to start whittling down the number of resistance members you have, and certainly some of the enemies you encounter can add more spies to the deck. Some enemies or during some missions, they'll kill civilians, and so this game is lost by either failing too many missions. So missions have a attack value you have to beat to get rid of them. But you always have to go on a mission, even if you can't necessarily defeat it. Then you would lose by having too many civilian casualties. You could lose by running out of resistance members, or in the campaign, if you were to fail a scenario parameter, you would also lose. So the aim of the game is really just to get to your win condition, which in the base version is complete 3 missions, and then there's different scores assigned to the missions you've chosen to go on. The more difficult the mission, the higher your score. Or there is like a 12 campaign scenario that's also on Board Game Arena, where you have certain criteria you must fulfill. Maybe that is you can't have any civilian casualties. Maybe that is you can't fail any missions. Maybe that is you must defeat specific missions, in addition to still having several of these lose elements, these lose conditions in play. So I've played a fair number of just the base game because, as I said, I refused to read the rules, so it took me a little while to figure it out. But then I did figure it out, and I've started on the campaign, but I am now stuck on Scenario 2. Scenario 2 means that you can't have any civilian casualties, and you have to defeat 3 specific missions, and you have to get rid of 4 particular types of enemy. And I've managed to complete the 3 missions, but not get rid of the enemy types, and I've just gone round in circles. Most of the time I just get beat really quickly. I see on the forums that other people have difficulty with this mission in particular, but it is beatable. It's always felt like, or at least half the time, it's felt like it's beatable, and just never managed to get the characters I needed in the right order. I maybe chose to play a character hidden when I needed to play them revealed, perhaps because they had the planning action. I didn't know what enemies I was up against, so I needed their stronger attack side, which typically happens when a character is revealed. And I can see myself playing this a fair few more times to get to grips with it and work my way through these scenarios. And I will I'll look much more closely into Witchcraft and potentially purchase that as well.
Well, I'm glad to hear you enjoyed Resist. I actually backed this on Kickstarter back in the day, and I did a live stream of it, so you can go and find it on the channel if you want to see it played in action.
And did you hate it?
No, I didn't. I really liked it actually. I thought it was very evocative. It's a period of history that's quite close to my heart because my dad was a professor in Spanish cultural history, and his specialism was the poetry of the Spanish exiles, who were the poets and creatives who were exiled during Franco's reign because they were too outspoken against the state.
Mhm.
So, sort of helping to maintain and document a large part of Spanish cultural heritage was his area of expertise. Which is why I got involved in it, because it's not the sort of thing. Solo games is not the sort of thing I normally go in for,
Yeah.
but very evocative and yeah, really a sort of excellent little game. Although I haven't tried the campaign, and I think I just tried the sort of standalone set.
Yeah.
I think, which sort of gives you different difficulty metrics. So not difficulty metrics, but challenge metrics. It's like you're going on the mission, and then you can bow out at different levels, and you sort of have to push your luck to try and get to the end.
Yeah.
I say push your luck, push the boundaries, so to speak. So you can go and find out if I did that if you want to check out the stream at some stage.
Well, the good thing about the game, I'd certainly say, like, obviously not reading the rules is you're never going to be great out of the gate, but I'd certainly, as I came to understand the game more and I could get better, and rather than just losing characters left and right, knowing when to spend them, how to get more characters into my deck, things like that. Where it's a game I can see myself eventually beating scenario 2, and hopefully then cakewalk for the rest of the scenarios. But yeah, I wouldn't keep going back to it if I didn't think I could improve. But there is an element of luck, of course, with what you draw.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So I'll just wrap up, I think, this episode here by talking about Battalion War of the Ancients, which is sort of new from Osprey Games. This is a 2 or 4 player head-to-head war game designed by Paolo Mori and Francesco Sinocci. And it says here it's 2 to 45 minutes playtime, which is probably actually about right. Maybe a bit longer if you're doing the 4-player variant, which is actually head-to-head, 2v2. It's a 1.8 out of 5. Sure. Yeah, maybe. I would say that its complexity is deceiving. It is actually fairly straightforward. It's fairly simple. It's just that it's also unusual. It's not typically like much you will have seen before, unless you've seen Pocket Battles, because that's a system by the same designers from 15 years ago, and this is kind of a reiteration of that. So if you know that game, then you'll sort of know what's going on in this game. But it is War of the Ancients because it's 4 sort of ancient armies. There's Rome, Carthage, the other ones, and the blue ones.
And the other 2.
I can't remember the other 2.
Han Dynasty and the Greco-Bactrian Cavalry.
That's right. And so I actually played this twice. I played it head-to-head. It really feels like it wants to be a 2-player game. It really feels like a head-to-head game, and the 4-player variant was invented so they could put 4 players on the box. It also seems to say 2 to 4, but I don't think it does 3-player unless you play the 4-player variant and then someone plays 2-handed. But it's a team game at 4. And I played 2 games of it head-to-head. And we actually played 3 games of it, because we played the first scenario, which is Rome versus Carthage. Then we swapped sides, played it again. Yeah. Then we played Han Dynasty versus Greco-Roman, what was that one?
The Greco-Bactrian
Cavalry. Right. Which is the Greeks, I guess. But yeah, so it's what it's sort of mimicking are these huge pitched battles. You've got rank and file soldiers that are marching across the battlefield and attacking each other. And the board itself is actually, there's no board. You just play on the table, and you've got these just these little cardboard dividers that go out onto the table and divide the center of the table into different zones. 3 zones if you're playing head to head, 5 zones if you're playing 2v2. Or if you want to be a little bit more thematic, you might call them fronts or flanks. But if you're playing head-to-head, it's 3, and there's the center, and then the 2 flanks, right? And you're going to deploy units on each side, and then you've got a camp board, which is like your player area, your player board. It's called your camp, and it sits by the center zone. And if the enemy wins, if they defeat all of your stuff, or you need to draw a card from your tactics deck and cannot, or they, at the beginning of their turn, they have units in the center zone and you don't, in which case they rush your camp and burn it down and you've lost. And then the flanks, so they're less important, but you can charge across the zones. And so you can redeploy at the beginning of your turn quite easily, just moving units back and forth. But you have to give up your tactics cards, which are very powerful and very useful. Or instead you can just, you can destroy one of your enemies on the flank. And then if you have units on the flank and they're unopposed by any enemy units, they can charge like unopposed into the center. So that's potentially a big maneuver. The units themselves are made up of just ranks. You've got these sort of cardboard tokens that slot together. It's quite satisfying, actually. It's like the actual presentation of the game is very pleasing. Like, it's not complex. It's not fancy. Certainly if you're used to your big bling Kickstarter stuff, it's probably not going to wow you in that sense. But just the idea that you're doing rank and file infantry and cavalry and soldiers, and you've literally got these cardboard ranks and they just slot together. So if you've got 3 ranks, it's just 3 tiles that are slot together to make a sort of a unit, a block of unit. That's really satisfying and pleasing. The units themselves have keywords, and the keywords can work together to combo and create powerful interactions. But what you've got is you can either create a block, a unit out of single type of rank, so it's all the same unit type, or you can mix and match. And then you've got what's called a mixed unit, and then what you're trying to do is get the most out of comboing these different interactions. And I suppose there's 2 things you're looking at there, really. One is the keywords that give these units special effects, and the other is they've got something called oh god, what's it called? I can't remember. Cohesion. Let's call it cohesion. It's something funny like that, but it's effectively their health before they're routed and break and run away. Mm-hmm. And so maybe you're looking for sort of one rank that has quite high cohesion, because when they're a whole unit, they can take an amount of disorder, it's called, up to their cohesion. And then when disorder is higher than cohesion, you start to lose unit tiles, and then they get wiped out. And so that's bad. What you've got as well are these order tokens, and the order tokens are how you activate the units on your turn. So you'll play an order token out to a unit to activate it, and then it can do a thing. But what's really intriguing as well is when you have to assign disorder because they're taking damage, you flip the order tokens over and they become disorder. And then they need to like cool down and come back to your player board. So it's sort of like an investment. You're going to lose your action economy in the short term, but keep your unit alive. And this trade-off is a particular dilemma because the game is very dicey, right? Each of the ranks will have dice on them or values on them that you're trying to meet by throwing these D10s. And it's got that thing as well where like a 10 is a crit. So when you're rolling dice for a unit, you'll count up how many you get. Usually it's 3 to 5. It's always 3, and then you get extra dice under certain situations. You can also sack off these tactics cards to get more dice. We're going to throw them all, and then you have to match up the numbers to the values on the units. So some units have low numbers, so they're very good at hitting, and other units have very high numbers, so they're bad at hitting. And then if you roll a 10, you actually get to set that aside before you assign any of the dice. So the 10s are like always hits, and also they don't occupy spaces on the unit tiles themselves. So you could get, like if you have a unit that's only got 2 values, you'll never get a hit more than 2 hits, unless you roll 10s. So there's always like this sort of long shot chance of maybe doing some kind of mega hit. In which case your opponent then has to soak that up with disorder or remove their units to compensate, remove their ranks from their unit to compensate. You've also got cards that you can play from your hand that are pretty powerful tactics cards, and you'll get to draw more of those as the game goes on. At some point, you'll have to take what's called like a refresh turn, where effectively all you're doing is getting your order tokens back and drawing a card, and that's it. So the timing of that, playing around the timing of that, is sort of this core dilemma of timing and tension. Like, you don't want to be, because as you build up to the recharge turn, you're going to be lower and lower on order tokens because you're using the order tokens to issue orders to your units. And that's one of the key things as well. Like, if the unit is all the same rank, it's cheaper to order with the tokens. If you mix it so that you've got multiple different unit types to get those keyword combos off, then they're more expensive to order with the tokens. So managing those order tokens is really important. And then as you've placed them all out in the units, because you're giving them orders, then you won't have any to turn into disorder, so your units become more vulnerable. So in that moment, right before you take sort of a recharge turn to get your order tokens back, that's when that's a prime moment for your opponent to strike and try and wipe your stuff out. Anyway, as I'm talking about it, I'm like, oh, this sounds really exciting. Sounds great. We didn't have a very good time with it, though,
right.
Which is a bummer, because like on the table, it looks great. Like, there's this whole mechanism where you charge and then your opponent has to pick your reaction, and then you can like flank someone. And so you wind up with these sort of blocks of units charging into each other, and then one's off to the side. And I had this war chariot in the third game, which could actually disengage and pull back, which just looked really cool because it would charge forward. My opponent would just roll their eyes and be like, I don't want to engage that. It's just going to run away again. I'm like, yeah, that's its thing. So, and then my opponent had these sort of like cards that let their archer shoot twice. They just spent like the whole game waiting for me to charge so that they could just fill me full of arrows. So there was a lot of sort of interesting stuff going on, and a lot of really fun and interesting timing considerations, and the managing of the order tokens was great. And where the game just kind of didn't work for us was in the dice. It just felt way too swingy. And we didn't really feel like we could consciously get better at it. We're sort of like, after the 3 games, we're like, what would we do better next time? And it doesn't help that also, like, I don't know if the scenarios I want to know what the intended sort of game format is, because Pocket Battles was a head-to-head game. And this one's been broadened out to 4, but it doesn't really feel like, I'll give you an example, right? In the baby beginner scenario, it suggests you play Rome versus Carthage. Carthage has some tactics cards that it just can't use based on its army composition. So then it can sack them off to get extra dice in combat, right? So there's always a use for the tactics cards. They're not useless, but the printed effect of the card can't be triggered because of the the army composition. And I'm just curious about why they did that instead of giving Carthage at least one front, either the center or either of the flanks, where it could trigger that card. I don't know if maybe the pre-made scenarios they're trying to make them as equal as possible, which I suppose you would want to do, but also is the game intended to be an army builder, and really we should just get stuck in with trying to design our own armies. Mm-hmm. But I haven't actually looked at the rules for how that functions, so I'm reticent to give it sort of a full review until I've actually sat down and built some armies with someone who knows how to play. But our initial takeaway was we don't really understand how we could necessarily do better at the game, and it felt like the dice decided a lot of the outcomes. Having said that, it was generally very swingy on both sides, so it was kind of really back and forth throughout, and then someone would win. But the other thing I'd point out was that, it didn't often feel like the sort of the strategic plays that we were making, or when we sort of planned something and pulled off a cool maneuver, like my opponent waiting for me to charge the whole game so that they could pull off this double arrow ambush strike. It didn't pay off. Like, they just rolled bad, and then I just charged them anyway.
Right.
And they were really disappointed, and I was kind of disappointed for them.
Yeah.
So it just didn't feel like there was sort of these really good, or it just felt like there was lots of scope from planning strategically and making strategic choices and timing things right. Like, I was, every time I wanted to sort of buy a bit of time, I'd just charge in with that chariot and retreat to just sort of play for time a little bit and still do something sort of effective. And that was working out really well. And so I was pleased that I'd sort of discovered how to use that strategically. But I didn't feel like that's why I won that game. I felt like I won that game because I rolled better and my opponent rolled real bad on that really important dice archery attack. So
yeah, I could see that. I mean, I think I maybe briefly mentioned this game last podcast, and then said I kind of turned away from it a little after seeing what was actually involved. The couple of things. Firstly, maybe you had a bad time because you're rolling d10s instead of d8s.
Is it supposed to Oh, it is d8s. You're right. Sorry, my bad. Did I say d10s?
Yeah. So,
no, of course,
much harder to get a 10 than an 8.
Yeah, we're rolling the correct dice. I'm probably just thinking of Undaunted.
Yeah, so that's the other thing, Undaunted, which I think is also Osprey.
Totally different game and different designers. Though.
It is, but I kind of bounced off that. You were mentioning sort of balance there, and I bounced off Undaunted because of the imbalance of the scenarios. So if they have tried to make the scenarios as even as possible, I'm more likely to want to just sit down and play one of those than I am to play a single scenario in Undaunted, where it's a 75-25% chance for one side to win.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm a big fan of Undaunted. I really like it, and I enjoy it whenever I play it. Undaunted feels less like weirdly less sort of competitive than this, right? And when I say that, what I mean is like this feels very sort of chess-like, because you've got two forces directly arrayed head to head. Undaunted feels, I don't know why, it just feels a bit more casual, I suppose. Which is interesting. Because if I had to pinpoint why, I guess it's because it's more asymmetrical between the two. It's not more asymmetrical, actually. I'll have a think on that. Maybe I'll come back to it in a future episode.
Yeah.
But the point is, this one, it's maybe just because in this, you don't really have actions where you're not directly confronting someone. All of your actions in Battalion are charge and shoot, and that's like it, right? Even when you reposition, you then attack with a different unit. So you're never not doing something really aggressive. Whereas in Undaunted, there's elements of playing of sort of spatial objectives, capturing areas where you're not necessarily playing, you're playing aggressively, but not attacking. But I expected a lot from this, partly because I like Paolo Mori's other designs. I don't know about Francesco Cirocci. I don't know their other designs, but I was very excited about this, and I really liked the premise of it. But fundamentally, I guess the point was that it feels like this sort of very direct, head-to-head, confrontational game, and you can see that it's actually a reiteration of Pocket Empires, Pocket Battles, which used D6s and didn't have tactics decks, as far as I can tell, just from the pictures I looked at. It's also got like sort of a vaguely similar unit construction system, but they're side by side in Pocket Battles, and I don't know. It doesn't look like there's sort of flanking maneuvers and things, but it's hard to get a sense just from the pictures. I haven't played it, but it looked lighter. I guess what I'm saying is it looked lighter and quicker. And I wonder if maybe this sort of core dice system needed a bit more weight or some kind of system to mitigate the dice, right? Because there are tactics cards that let you re-roll. You can add extra dice as well, but it just felt just so sort of swingy, coming up like crazy good in certain circumstances, just big hits that had major consequences, and huge whiffs that had major consequences. And it just felt like those were the sort of the things deciding the game rather than the tactical decisions we were making, which was a pity. I guess I would say that I do need to try the constructed unit construction format before, any of that. I'm not sure if, like, when I say scenarios, it's just preconceived sort of battle lines, and I don't know how indicative those are to the strength of the game. Although I can't imagine that once we start building our own armies, it's going to massively change my opinion I certainly would feel like I wouldn't be doing the game full justice if I didn't give it a try.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's my take on Battalion after 3 plays. And to be fair, they're very quick. But we this was a review copy that was given to me by the publisher at Essenspiel.
Nice one. So we will not be making an appearance again before the new year?
That's right. We are going to take a break for Christmas because we have every right to do so. We have every right. We're going to take a break for Christmas because you can't stop us.
No, my mum will be really sad that there's not a podcast during this time.
But we would, of course, be putting that out on, on January 1st. We'd have to record it on Christmas Day, something like that. So the next podcast should be out on Wednesday, the 8th of January, which will be our next episode. And I'll talk about AI 100% Human, a quick Tableau building game that I played recently, as well as something else maybe.
I'll hopefully get some games played over Christmas and New Year. And I hope everybody that's listening also manages to get some games in. Maybe Santa will bring you something nice. Or more likely a lump of coal, knowing the kind of people that leave the comments.
You've already got yourself a nice Lord of the Rings Christmas present for 2 years from now.
For 2026 maybe, yeah.
But my family are not really board gamers, so I always struggle to think about what I'm going to take home to play or take for Christmas to play with them. It's got to be fast and quick and light. They bounced off so Clover so really hard, which was surprising to me. And they can't play just one either because they can't keep their mouths shut when they're the clue or when they're the clue givers.
Yeah.
And so I was just going to say the only game I've managed to sort of successfully get them invested in is Insider, which is the hidden role, the hidden traitor version of 20 questions that Oink Game makes. So it's like 20 questions where one person knows the thing and everyone else is trying to guess the thing within like 3 minutes, except one of the guessers knows what the thing is. And they need to make sure that everyone else also gets the thing, but then afterwards everyone has to vote on who they thought knew the whole time what the thing was, including the sort of game master who is answering the 20 questions as well. They get to partake in the vote. So the person has to sort of guide the team while staying undercover. It's a great little game. It's dead quick to play. And for some reason, it's the one that actually gels with my non-gamer family. And I was just wondering if you had any sort of little games you always take at Christmas.
No, I mean, I'd say whatever gets you playing. Anything you can have a good time sitting around with friends, family, have a laugh, and get played as a win. Even if that's the Christmas bingo or one of those stocking fillers that are weird riddle joke games, or even if it's the best of Christmas logos. This year I foresee hopefully smash out a few of the escape room games, sitting on quite a few, and maybe some co-ops. So that could be a Bombbusters campaign, and I've got a whole Exit Advent calendar to be done that I'm probably not likely to get much of a chance to do before Christmas. So some food, see some friends, play some games.
Brilliant. Well, sounds good. Merry Christmas, Barry.
And to you, and God bless us, everyone. Bye.